The war ended without ceremony, only the long echo of silence where artillery once spoke. Captain Elias Ward stood on the balcony of the reclamation citadel, watching twin suns sink behind a scarred horizon. Ash still drifted like grey snow across the plains, carried by winds that smelled of iron fire and melted stone. Victory had come at a cost, so vast it felt unreal, and the banners of the Galactic Council hanging from the towers below seemed like decorations for a funeral. Elias wore the uniform of the Terran Expeditionary Forces, its fabric patched and scorched, its insignia dulled by months of campaign. He had survived the siege of Karos, the trench fights on Veli's Prime, and the final orbital break that shattered the enemy fleets. Survival did not feel like triumph, it felt like an unanswered question. A chime sounded behind him, soft and formal. He turned to see a council adjudicator flanked by 2 security drones, their lights pulsing calmly. "Captain Ward," the adjudicator said, voice filtered and emotionless, "by decree of the post-war accords, assets seized from the defeated coalition are being redistributed." Elias frowned. "Assets," he repeated, tasting the word with unease. The adjudicator inclined their head. Among them are bonded individuals formerly held under enemy law. A side door opened, and she stepped through. She was tall and slender, her posture straight despite the faint tremor in her hands. Her skin shimmered like moonlit porcelain, with faint lines of bioluminescence tracing her collarbones and arms. Eyes like deep amethyst regarded the room with wary intelligence, framed by hair that fell in silver-black waves. She wore simple garments, ceremonial rather than practical, the mark of someone once displayed rather than protected. Elias felt the air leave his lungs, not in desire, but in shock. This was no weapon or artifact, this was a person. "Designation Lyri," the adjudicator continued, "species Aurelian, former bond servant to High Marshal Threx. Under council law, she is now transferred to your custody as recompense for service." The word custody struck harder than any battlefield impact. Elias clenched his jaw. "I did not request this." "Requests are not required," the adjudicator replied. "The war has left many displaced. This system maintains order." Lyri's gaze flickered to Elias, searching, measuring. He saw fear there, yes, but also something sharper, a hope she refused to name. "Leave us," Elias said suddenly. The adjudicator hesitated, then gestured for the drones to withdraw, the door sealing behind them with a muted hiss. Silence returned, heavy and intimate. "I am not your master," Elias said carefully, choosing each word like a step through a minefield. Lyri tilted her head, the bioluminescent lines along her neck glowing faintly. "That is not what the decree states." "The decree can burn," Elias replied, surprising even himself with the heat in his voice. He took off his cap and set it aside, making himself smaller, less imposing. "You are free here." Lyri's breath caught, a sound halfway between disbelief and pain. "Freedom is a word used before punishment," she said softly, her voice musical but worn thin. Elias leaned against the railing, looking back out at the ruined world. "Humans fought this war because we were told the enemy enslaved entire species," he said. "If we become the same after winning, then we lost something worse than lives." Lyri stepped closer, cautious, as if approaching a wild animal. "You could send me away," she said. "Most do not." "I won't send you anywhere without your consent," Elias replied. "But I also won't pretend the galaxy fixes itself overnight." A distant transport roared overhead, carrying refugees to uncertain futures. The citadel lights flickered on as night settled, casting long shadows across the balcony. Lyri folded her hands, the practiced gesture of obedience she could not yet unlearn. "What would you have me do?" she asked. Elias met her eyes, steady and human. "First," he said, "we survive the aftermath together. Then we figure out who you want to be when no one owns you." For the first time since she entered the room, Lyrie's glow brightened, not from fear, but from something fragile and new. Beyond them, the war-torn planet turned slowly beneath the stars, waiting to see what the victors would become. Morning arrived without gentleness, filtered through pale shields that softened the twin suns into bands of gold. Elias woke to the unfamiliar quiet of the citadel quarters, a silence not broken by alarms or distant bombardment. For a moment his body still expected the war, muscles tense, breath shallow, mind already counting exits. He rose and found Lyrie standing near the viewport, her reflection doubled against the glass. She had not slept, or perhaps her kind slept differently. The bioluminescent lines along her arms pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat learning a new rhythm. "You do not rest," Elias said quietly, careful not to sound like an order. "I am accustomed to waiting," Lyrie replied, her voice steady but distant. Elias moved to the small galley unit and activated it, the machine humming as it prepared nutrient rations. "You don't have to wait here," he said. "You can move freely within the citadel." Lyrie turned, surprise flickering across her features. "Without escort?" she asked. "Yes," Elias said, "without chains, escorts, or permissions." The word chains made her glow dim for a heartbeat. "My people were taught that freedom invites cruelty," she said, "that unguarded movement leads to correction." Elias handed her a ration pack, then hesitated. "Only if you want," he added. She accepted it slowly, examining the packaging like a puzzle. "You keep offering choice," she said. "Is this a test?" "No," Elias answered. "It's a practice." They ate in silence, not awkward but heavy, like two survivors sharing a shelter during a storm. Outside the viewport, transports drifted in ordered lanes, carrying soldiers home and prisoners to tribunals. After a while, Lyrie spoke again. "The High Marshal owned 7 of us," she said. "We were displayed during negotiations, symbols of his dominance." Elias felt his hands curl into fists, then forced them open. "You were used as trophies," he said, more statement than question. "Yes," Lyrie replied, "but also as leverage. Our pain ensured obedience." The room seemed smaller as she spoke, walls pressing inward with unspoken history. "Why are you telling me this?" Elias asked. "Because ownership does not end when documents change," she said, meeting his gaze. "It ends when behavior does." Elias nodded slowly, understanding the weight of her words. "Then tell me when I cross a line," he said. Later that day, they walked the inner corridors of the citadel together. No guards followed, though curious glances did. Humans and aliens alike paused, whispering, eyes drawn to Lyrie's luminous patterns and Elias' scarred uniform. She walked half a step behind him at first, habit gidding her feet. Elias noticed and slowed, then stopped entirely. "You don't have to follow me," he said. Lyrie hesitated, then stepped forward until they were side by side. The simple adjustment seemed to cost her more effort than any physical labor. They reached the observation gardens, a space reclaimed from war planning chambers, now filled with living plants from dozens of worlds. Lyrie's breath caught as she entered. "These were forbidden," she whispered. "Living beauty was considered wasteful." She knelt beside a flowering vine, fingers hovering just above the petals. "May I?" she asked. "Yes," Elias said softly. When she touched the plant, the vine responded, leaves curling slightly as if recognizing her. Lyrie laughed, a small sound edged with disbelief. "It reacts to me," she said. "Life recognizes life," Elias replied. As days passed, their routine formed without commands. They shared meals, conversations, and long silences filled with watching ships depart. Elias arranged for Lyrie to access the Citadel archives, uncensored and unrestricted. She absorbed knowledge at a startling pace: history, science, art, and law. One evening, she looked up from a holographic display, eyes bright. There are legal pathways for emancipation, she said, but they are slow, intentionally complex. I'll testify, Elias said without hesitation. So will others. Lyrie studied him, searching for the hidden cost. What do you gain? She asked. Elias considered the question. A chance to sleep without wondering if I became the monster we fought, he said. The next week brought a summons. A council chamber awaited, vast and cold, its walls etched with victories claimed by empires long fallen. Lyrie stood beside Elias, her posture straight, her glow steady. The adjudicators spoke of balance, restitution, and stability. Elias spoke of consent, dignity, and the future. Lyrie spoke last, her voice clear, resonant, and unbroken. I was owned, she said, but I was never an object. If this council cannot tell the difference, then it has learned nothing from the war. Silence followed, heavy and absolute. When the ruling came, it was cautious, conditional, but real. Lyrie was granted provisional autonomy, her bond status suspended pending review. Not freedom yet, but a door unlocked. Outside the chamber, Lyrie exhaled shakily, light flaring along her skin. I spoke without permission, she said, half expecting reprisal. Elias smiled, tired and genuine. You spoke because it was yours to do, he replied. As they walked back through the citadel, the galaxy felt different. Still broken, still dangerous, but no longer inevitable. Lyrie looked out at the stars, no longer as unreachable masters, but as destinations. The chains are lighter, she said. Elias nodded. And one day, he said, they'll be gone entirely. The citadel changed. Once Lyrie was no longer listed as property. Not in architecture or law alone, but in the way people looked at her. Some with respect, some with confusion, some with quiet resentment. Elias noticed it first in the corridors. Whispers softened when she approached, conversations paused and resumed with careful neutrality. Freedom, he realized, was visible, and visibility invited scrutiny. Lyrie felt it too. Their eyes weighed differently now, she said one evening as they stood overlooking the docking bays. I am no longer invisible, nor protected by invisibility. That's the part no one tells you, Elias replied. Being seen can be another kind of battlefield. Her glow dimmed slightly at that, but she did not retreat. Instead, she straightened, shoulders back, chin lifted. I survived battlefields before, she said. This one at least is mine. Word spread quickly through the lower levels of the citadel. Aurelian refugees, once scattered and silent, began to gather in small groups. They came not to Elias, but to Lyrie. At first, they only watched her from a distance. Then one approached, then another. Soon they spoke in hushed tones, sharing stories of loss, survival, and the slow erosion of self under bondage. Lyrie listened without interruption, hands folded not in submission now, but in focus. Elias remained nearby, not as a guard, but as presence. He understood this was not his space to lead. She walks like someone who remembers herself, one refugee murmured. That is dangerous, another replied, and inspiring. The council noticed too. A summons arrived, marked priority civic review. Elias read it once, then again, jaw tightening. They want to assess your influence, he said, handing the data slate to Lyrie. They call it preventative governance. Lyrie scanned the text, lines of bioluminescence pulsing faster. They fear precedent, she said. If one bond breaks publicly, others will strain theirs. Good, Elias replied. She smiled faintly, a human gesture she had practiced in private. The hearing was smaller than the last, more intimate and more dangerous. No grand chamber, only a circular room with a single table and 3 adjudicators. The kind of setting where words were weapons sharpened carefully. You have gathered followers, one adjudicator said, voice smooth. I have gathered survivors, Lyrie replied calmly. You are still under provisional status, another added. I am under observation, Lyrie said, not silence. They turned to Elias. You are encouraging instability, the lead adjudicator said. Elias leaned forward, scars catching the light. I am encouraging accountability, he replied. You ended a war to preserve order, then maintained the enemy's chains because they were convenient. The room chilled perceptibly. Convenience was the one accusation the council hated most. After hours of measured pressure and veiled threats, the ruling came. Lyrie would be permitted to organize educational and cultural assemblies under supervision. A compromise intended to limit her reach while appearing generous. Outside, Lyrie exhaled slowly. They gave me a leash made of paper, she said. Paper burns, Elias replied. The assemblies began in the gardens. Aurelian light patterns shimmered among Terran trees and Kelari blossoms. Stories were exchanged alongside music, art, and shared meals. Lyrie spoke often, but never alone. She invited others to stand beside her, to speak in their own voices. Each testimony became a thread, weaving a narrative too complex to dismiss. Elias watched from the edges. For the first time since the war, he felt useful without carrying a weapon. He coordinated logistics, mediated disputes, and quietly deflected attempts at intimidation. One night, as the gardens glowed with bioluminescent harmony, Lyrie approached him. There is something I must decide, she said. He turned to face her, attentive. What is it? I have been offered relocation, she said. Aurelian space, restored and protected, I would be safe there. Elias felt a dull ache he did not immediately name. That sounds like a good offer, he said honestly. It is, she agreed. But it removes me from here, from this moment. You don't owe anyone permanence, Elias said. Least of all me. Lyrie studied his face, reading the unspoken with increasing fluency. When you gave me choice, she said, you did not expect it to hurt. He laughed softly, without humor. War teaches you to accept pain as proof you're alive, he said. This feels different. They walked in silence, past clusters of conversation and light. Finally, Lyrie stopped. I will go, she said, but not yet. Elias waited. I need to finish something, she continued. There are those who cannot speak yet. I must help them find their voices before I leave. He nodded, pride and sorrow intertwining. I'll support whatever you choose, he said. Weeks passed. The council's patience thinned as public opinion shifted. What began as quiet gatherings became cited examples in policy debates across the systems. One morning, a revised decree arrived. Lyrie's bond status was permanently dissolved, no conditions attached. The justification cited social stability through ethical reform. Lyrie read the words slowly, then pressed her palm to the screen. It's over, she whispered. Elias stood beside her, uncertain whether to speak. She turned and embraced him, brief but fierce, light flaring brilliantly across her skin. Thank you for not owning me, she said. He swallowed, voice rough. Thank you for choosing yourself. As transports lifted from the citadel that evening, Lyrie stood at the edge of departure. Her future no longer written by conquest or decree. Only by choice, uncertain and radiant. She looked back once, meeting Elias' gaze across the distance. Not as master and servant, not as savior and saved, but as two beings who survived the aftermath and refused to let it define them. The day Lyrie prepared to leave arrived without ceremony, yet everything felt ceremonial. Transports lined the docks like patient animals, engines humming softly. Elias stood with her at the threshold, the boundary between what had been and what might come next. She wore traveler garments, now practical and elegant, the light along her skin steady and confident. No insignia marked her as owned or provisional, only herself. "I thought leaving would feel like escape," she said. "Instead it feels like continuation." "That means you built something real," Elias replied. "Real things don't end just because distance appears." They exchanged no promises, having learned how fragile such things could be. Instead, they shared understanding. Lyrie placed a small data crystal in his hand. "Records," she said, "stories, testimonies, proof that change happened here." "I'll guard it," Elias said. "Not as a soldier," she added gently. "As a witness." The transport doors closed, light flaring as the vessel lifted. Elias watched until it vanished into the upper lanes, then remained long after the sky returned to stillness. For the first time since the war, he felt the ache of peace. Months passed. The citadel grew quieter as soldiers departed and administrators replaced uniforms with suits. Elias declined reassignment offers, choosing instead to remain as a liaison between worlds. His role was undefined, which suited him. The gardens flourished, becoming a permanent forum for dialogue and reform. Former bond servants spoke openly now, protected by policy that had once seemed impossible. Elias often stood at the edges, listening, learning, letting others lead. One evening, a familiar shimmer appeared among the leaves. Lyrie stepped into the garden as if she had never left. Older somehow, steadier, carrying the gravity of someone who had been listened to. "You came back," Elias said, unable to keep surprise from his voice. "I said continuation," she replied with a smile. She spoke of restored Aurelian worlds, of councils reshaped by survivor voices, of resistance softened by persistence. "And now," she said, "I travel, helping where I can, returning where it matters." They walked together beneath the glowing canopy. No shadows followed them now, only memory. "Do you regret staying?" Lyrie asked. Elias considered the question, watching leaves sway in artificial wind. "No," he said, "I learned that endings don't require departure." Lyrie nodded, light pulsing warmly. "Then we both chose well." As night settled over the citadel, the stars seemed closer, less judgmental. Two survivors stood among growing things, not defined by war or chains, only by the quiet strength of choices made after everything else had burned.